Hey there, beautiful people. Tre'vell Anderson here with BlackTalk, a film screening and criticism salon series where Black movies matter. In the great tradition of the Harlem Renaissance, I have gathered together a host of cultural workers and beautiful thinkers to watch a movie and talk about it, okay? We're putting the power and purpose of film criticism back where it belongs, in the hands of the beloved community. Our first movie is a Spike Lee joint. We're going to 1988 with School Daze, okay? And let's just say people had things to say. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Slayzhon for more, and I hope you enjoy. So, who has seen before tonight School Daze? And, okay, most people. Okay, who had not? Okay, three people. Three people had not. Well, for those of you who had not seen it before, I would love to hear your initial reactions, thoughts, feelings, what sticks out to you. Jerome, I see you smiling.
I was trying to think of what I was going to say.
It's a lot, though. So you don't have to hit on everything. We know it's a lot.
No, I think my initial thought is the ways in which, at the time in which this movie's coming out, there's never a lot of Black films, but I think at this time there's really not a lot of Black films. So it's not only the Black gaze, but all the other gazes that are looking at this film and just really being critical of, like, as a creator, what sort of how is he considering what he's going to show and what audiences are going to respond to what he's saying. And I think especially with the fight scene now, with the explanation that you give, it's I don't think anything of it, but I do feel some type of way about knowing that other people are looking at it and they're getting a certain impression. And I think I can't remember, somebody was talking about earlier about the Jigaboo song, and just like thinking about, like, I watch it, I think it's funny. Well, not funny, not simply funny, but I think that I can understand the nuances of it. But then I would feel really uncomfortable if I was in the car with mixed company and they were singing that song or referring to it in any way. So
I felt that way recently watching American Fiction. And I was in a theater. It was a special screening, and I was maybe like one of 10 people in the theater that holds like 300. And the whole row behind me was like laughing very loudly. And I was like, I'm pretty sure these folks behind me aren't Black. What do you find funny about this? And so I kind of get that discomfort. But I'll say, as like a Black person watching it from an HBCU experience myself, I appreciated having something that I can like grab onto and relate to and be like, oh, this is really like something that I recognize from my own experience. And we don't get a lot of things like that that don't consider that maybe a white person's gonna watch this, or a person who's not of this culture is gonna watch this. So I don't know, it's interesting.
Interesting fact, I don't know if you noticed, there's no white people in this movie at all. And you know, we don't even see that today. You know, I'm just saying. You know, in our Black films of today, we don't even see a completely white, a completely Black cast. And obviously, you know, we're gonna dive into some of the complexities of
emphasis on complexity
of one School Daze. But you know, that is notable for the time period. What about you, Naomi?
Initially, I was thinking that maybe you chose this after like the first few minutes explained what was happening because of the BDS stuff that's been happening on campuses now for Palestine, and I thought, oh, it'll totally be about that, and then it really wasn't. I was really and I kind of was like waiting for a plot to develop, or like a newsy reason for this movie to be chosen. But I actually, there's like a whole movement in, I do a lot of book coverage too, but there's like a lot of interest from readers in books with no plots, just vibes now. And so it's like a valid thing to want from art sometimes, where you're, I want something vibe based. I want, you know, it's a really valuable portrait of Black campus life. I can't think of another movie that's shown me that, but also me waiting around for a plot to come was my own fault.
No, but like actually though, because I felt the same way.
But that's like my own training of like watching a film and thinking what's going to happen. But when I take that away and I look at what was presented to me, I'm like, this was actually, there are parts of it that are really interesting and thoughtful, and so yeah, I'm happy that I watched it.
I think when I first saw this movie, of course, the cinematography, the showing of Black faces and bodies, and just this thing that I was already brought up on gave me inspiration to something to look forward to when I get older. Also, now looking at it, of course, looking through the lens of, okay, well, where is the actual representation for the queer community or LGBTQ? Like, you could look at some people and believe, yes, in the college campus is there, but they didn't actually show that. Then also, it's always the against each other mentality amongst us, to where this man was very intelligent to bring it to the HBCU, but then also that was your subject matter. You didn't actually want to show them actually coming together. You made us, at the end, believe that it was a possibility, but we didn't actually see y'all coming together. So here we are in 2024, still with that possibility, because we actually are not coming together. We're in our silos, but we are not actually coming together.
Well, all right. Mychael, I see you over there with your screw face.
Well, because on college, like, I think we always, then when we're making movies, are thinking about this like utopian vision of the world and of Blackness that we want. This is what we need to put on, but that's not real. And if you think about messy ass 18 to 22-year-olds, like, there's a lot of tussle that happens on a college campus, and it's messy as hell. And so this movie, while in 2024 and in 1988, was like problematic as hell, but it's real. Like,
but why can't you lie to me?
Because you want to be lied to?
It's a movie. Well, it's not real. It's make believe.
But we take it as real.
I feel like the best way to describe this film for me, as someone who just watched it for the first time, it gives me the experience of yes and. Like, yes, this experience is beautiful, especially for the time, for it to drop and show Blackness in this way. However, there was a lot of issues for me. Structurally, acting, like, I think there was a lot of these things that I just did not particularly enjoy, and I think it goes back to what films, because they meant something to us when they first dropped, what films we continue to hold on a pedestal as like a part of our story. And I wonder, yes, that story will always be a part of us, but to be honest, it's not a part of me. I did not really kind of relate to it except for certain moments, and seeing Black joy and celebration and these like moments of understanding what I guess the D9 culture is of it all, the frat culture. But to be honest, I don't know if it holds up.
But I think that's fine, because it kind of adds to the idea that not all Black experiences are the same.
Yes.
This is a very specific Black experience. Right. This is the Black experience for folks who attended an HBCU or aspire to attend an HBCU or have been a part of HBCU culture by happenstance some way. And
even at that time.
And even at that time. Yeah. And before we get too far from Naomi's comment, like, someone saying that a movie is just vibes can be like a really sharp criticism, saying that like it's unfocused.
Well, that's what the critics said at the time.
Yeah.
To be clear, right?
And
it is unfocused. That's a style that we now kind of applaud him and attribute to him.
And beyond that, like, because it's unfocused and it's because it's so specific to that artist, now we have a whole new like subgenre of like film, where now folks from my generation, this movie came out the year I was born. 1988 is the year I was born. And so I don't know a life without like this style of film because this exists. So
absolutely.
What I will say is that like a Spike Lee joint, I'm not really a fan of them. I can acknowledge the cultural significance, but there's not really one Spike Lee film that I'm like rushing to go rewatch, even though I've seen a lot of them. And one thing that I observed that I thought was beautiful, much to your point about how like not one white person is in this film, this is probably, in recent years, the only film I've seen with so many particularly dark-skinned Black people on screen, and it's not like, the transatlantic slave trade. Like, it was interesting to see a narrative unfold, and it's like, not everybody, you know, the criticisms that we see today. Everybody, you know, I mean, look at the NBA, for example. Everybody passes the brown paper bag test. And so it was interesting. It's not even something that I was like consciously noting, but I'm like, dang, there's so much between men, women. There's just so many brown to dark skin representation on this campus. And we do not see this in our media reflected today because everyone's biracial.
And
or
you may
multiracial.
not be a direct fan of Spike Lee, but I think something that was mentioned in the movie was actually the trickle-down theory. I think you were a fan of his influence, though, because there are things in today's pop culture that reference this film specifically. Like, I know you love Beyonce. In Coachella, she had that whole movement that pulls from this film with the
Well, see, I'm also as HBCU alum, I'm keenly aware of
The culture.
Right, and how things show up. I can't acknowledge his influence. I'm just saying him linear Spike Lee, a Spike Lee joint, none of his films have ever spoken to me, but I can acknowledge his cultural significance because clearly they speak to a whole lot of people. People be ready to go to war for Spike Lee.
Brooke, you were trying to say something?
I mean, just what I haven't really seen in many movies, particularly just movies that are just black people talking to each other, which I really appreciated and liked. They were talking about the ways that HBCU administrators treat students.
Oh yes.
And you know, like even there were no bad white people like as in actors. Their presence was still there. They were still hanging on the wall. We saw their paintings and we saw the way that they used black administrators to be the overseers of these students. And so, you know, I mean, particularly because we are in this moment of students who are protesting, and I'm looking at, you know, my HBCUs. I'm also a grad, and I'm like, there's not gonna be an encampment on Hampton University's campus. It's not. It's just not gonna happen. And you know, understanding that the way that black students, and particularly at HBCUs, the respectability politics that that are drilled into us from the moment that we get there. You know, the way that our movements are shut down, the way that we don't actually have we're not empowered on campus. We are taught, you know, to fit in, to, you know, to assimilate, to do everything, to, like they were talking about in the film, you know, what's wrong with getting a good job? You know, I'm the first, there's so much on us, you know, to be the first graduate of our family, you know, to get the good job, you know, to not mess up because there's so much riding on our success that we don't have the space to say this isn't right. And if we do, you know, the consequences are going to be much more steep for us than for other students.
And then when you have to endure after going through all these years in HBCU, you matriculate for 4 years, you get this Afro-Black experience, and then the speaker at your commencement is Biden. It's Joe Biden, and it's just like, what is this communicating to us?
These are great questions. And you know, ironically, so the reason why I ultimately settled on School Daze was the very light storyline here about like there's a scene where they're camping out on the quad, right, in this movie. You know, it's glanced by, you know, it leads to a sex scene. But that was just very present to me, and the conversations about, you know, Biden being the commencement speaker for Morehouse, right? The institution whose experience Spike Lee had, right, is the basis of this film, he says. It's just really, really, really interesting. Garry, I'm coming to you because you quiet. And also, we went to that school together. So we have a unique experience, I feel.
Trigger me. I think it's interesting just because I think when you make race like the great equalizer in an environment like an HBCU, like what reigns supreme, what is that kind of de facto oppressive force that everyone's trying to either appease or avoid, and it's going to be the patriarchy. It's going to be hypermasculinity. You know, it's very much like, okay, that's the gaze. The women you see are fighting over who's the prettiest because they're going after the attention of the men. And the guys are like, you know, trying their best to be their most masculine, their most hypersexual, their most, you know, beautiful, like through the gaze of this my great what's his name? Great Almighty.
Great Brother.
Big Brother Almighty.
Big Brother Almighty.
Yeah.
Like he's like that guy. He gets to decide like who you are as a man. And I think everyone's just kind of wanting that sign off, that check off. And
And I think it absolutely like puts that binary right squarely in the middle of this plot, because even the girls who are pro natural hair and pro this, they're doing that in response to the girls who are trying to please these men. So it's like that binary exists because there's somebody that has to bring that tension to kind of counter what we're seeing on the screen in that way.
Okay, so that's what I'm like. I was born in '88 as well, by the way. But I'm just thinking to myself, all of the imagery that I saw from the '80s, every black woman had a perm. It's very rare to see. Like, I was like, was the natural hair movement a thing in '88? Because that's not what I see in photos. Everybody had relaxed hair. I also noted, like, I'm not a part of a BGLO, but my parents are. And the public process, the public pledge process, I thought was interesting because by the time I was in college, all of that was
Underground.
Yeah.
people popped out at probate.
Yeah.
If you knew, you knew. And if you didn't, you did. And so I
might not
thought,
say nothing.
right. And so, and I also, and it's just so crazy because I haven't seen this movie in so long. It didn't register to me until watching this that the wannabes and the jigaboos were not sororities. They were almost like auxiliaries to the fraternities, which makes me think of certain auxiliary groups, that still exist at certain HBCUs. And so I was like, wow, this whole time I thought they were in a sorority, but they were auxiliary groups. They're to serve the men.
I'm about to say, I feel like
The Jigaboos were not
subset
auxiliary.
of
They were just girls on the campus going against the
But they were supposed to be the like de facto
The pro-black,
auxiliaries to the fellas.
To the fellas, yeah. Go ahead, my guy.
I was gonna say though, I feel like I associated the gamma rays with the wannabes for sure. And I feel like they very much so held that space. I thought it was interesting that the other group didn't really have an org, but that's also why I thought it was fascinating when Rachel's like, I'm about to be a Delta, because to me it reminded me of Delta energy and the Delta aka binary. You know what I mean? Like it was very that without saying it.
And which I should also note, it's taboo. I thought that was interesting because I know at my campus, if you were part of another auxiliary, don't think about joining a sorority. It was very taboo. So for her to be open and honest about, I guess, that path she was taking, I was like, things were very different in '88 on this campus of this fictional school than what I experienced in my experience.
I know at Hampton, I went natural for the first time. Was it 2005? No, but there was one girl who had an afro. So I was also struck by that too.
Yeah.
I loved seeing that. But I mean, even though there were all these dark-skinned women on screen, like they weren't, I mean, again, they're called jigaboos. So like, it's not, it's not a positive thing. And even, it was just, we were talking about it while the movie was happening. It was like, one of them said, "Oh, you straightened your hair last night," and then the response was, "You're a monkey from the zoo."
It's almost like they're trying to reclaim that bad term.
It was like the daggers for. It was so just like
it was
the most
unbalanced.
Anti-black that you could possibly be, and that just to me, I don't know. That's why. I know people say that Spike Lee is like, he's gonna beat you over the head with his point. I missed it. Like my head is fine. Where was it? Because the only thing that he did, say was wrong and all the stuff was, the treatment of Tisha Campbell, by his own character. Like that was the only thing that was very clearly like, you did a bad thing, and there was another man to tell him.
To note, given
Yeah,
the time.
But can we? I think that also speaks to my point from earlier. Just like these films are held on such a pedestal, it literally informed how culture, I guess, reacted with everyone, right? And
Absolutely. So there's so many people who say they went to an HBCU because of School Days.
Yeah.
Right? And the School Days, A Different World combo, to be
and
specific.
it was one of those things where I would have loved to see a Google trend of the word jigaboo and how often it was probably used after this film came out. Because I think it's so interesting that I wonder, like Spike Lee films, obviously he's a holy grail, right? I think a lot of people would say that. But I think, what does it mean when your art is actually pouring into the toxicity of how it impacts our culture and how we actually interact with each other and how it's not the cause of it, it was not the beginning of it, but it was a part of it that kept it going. And so I think for me, it's is that really the legacy that you want to have? And I wonder when we should start really questioning that instead of just putting him up on this pedestal.
But I think that if you look at Spike Lee's whole canon, it's all been problematic as fuck.
Is that okay though?
Not saying it's okay, but I'm saying most of it is.
Yeah.
And I think I've been hearing a lot of conversations over the years about why are we putting this misogynist, this homophobe on a pedestal? Because if you look, I mean, even in She's Gotta Have It, the movie, horrible depiction of the sexual domination of a woman that was supposed to be free.
Yeah.
If you look at Crooklyn, which was, semi-autobiographical, but his father was horrible to his mother and the children, but we held him up on a pedestal. Jungle Fever. Like, there's so much in his canon that is.
I knew the term before I watched the film. Growing up, you hear she got jungle fever, he got jungle fever. What I do think, as Brooke was speaking about the whole jigaboo wannabe thing, I think it would have been interesting for Spike to have flipped it on the behind the scenes and put the wannabes in the crappy housing accommodations and the jigaboos in the upper echelon. I think that would have created an interesting dynamic. But also, speaking to Gary's point about when you're on a campus and it's monoracial for the most part, how things then break off. There has to be some sort of hierarchy created. I found it interesting with the colorism aspect, because I was like, were they really sitting around having these conversations like I'm better than you because I'm lighter than you? And what I mean by that is I know those conversations happen, but were they still that prevalent in 88 versus 58?
They were prevalent in 2000. I was at school.
When I was there, so.
How do you think Nicki Minaj became who she is? She's the light-skinned rapper versus...
Now, hold on. Leave the barbs alone. Leave the barbs alone. Whoa. Go ahead, Mekhi.
I don't know. I just have a question around, like, is portraying the shit that we all deal with every day, is that the same as pouring into the toxicity? I personally feel like it is the artist's job to show what is happening. That is like, you know what I mean? So I did not, I think, watch this and think, oh, he's condoning colorism. I think, if anything, he's like, this is how ridiculous this shit sounds. Do you hear what you're saying? Like, that was my takeaway, is to exaggerate it so that people can see how fucked up this shit really is and how it doesn't make sense for us to be fighting over something as simple as, like, how your hair is growing out of your head. And to me, that is the work of this type of film. And I'm like, if we erase it and we try to police it and say, oh, we don't want our filmmakers talking about this, how do we progress as a community?
If he had not been behind the scenes perpetuating colorism, I might give that some consideration. But I also think that
it's not method acting.
But that's method directing is not a thing. We can't make that a thing. Method acting,
but it is. It is a thing. It is.
100%.
I'm not saying I would run my set like that, but that is.
But doesn't that have to be consensual?
Exactly, and it wasn't.
That's the thing.
They didn't even know.
No, I know. I just. If you sign me up for something, and behind the scenes you puppeteering it under the guise of method,
and
that's without my consent.
And the actors did not know that's what was going on.
But
that's why they were fighting for real.
That's what I was going to say. I do think, without exaggeration, we also, with Tre'vell's context, kind of saw what that felt like in real life for people who had experienced being treated away because of their skin tone or because of their place in economic society, how you would react to that in that, like, one piece of, like, being furious and being upset or just being under pressure. Like, you got to see that. It's not a documentary, but hearing that, like, Spike Lee kept the camera recording because, like, these two folks who were being treated terribly by him.
But it wasn't even about being a documentary. He was literally trying to get something out of his act. He wanted to keep that tension. Not that it was right, but that's what 20-something-year-old Spike thought he needed to do.
I reminds me of the Jerome Carmichael reality show, where you're like,
process perspective, I get it.
how Jerome Carmichael was trying to manipulate, to me, it felt like, all of his friends and family in that series for the sake of the camera. Like, let's put them in conditions that you know is gonna make them feel a way or make them react a certain type of way, and then you know you're gonna get what you're gonna get. So I get what you mean by it feeling very excited.
Well, what he did do aesthetically, if we think that this movie came out in 1988, it was shot on film. It was probably shot on Kodak, which is not graded for black people. And aesthetically, he did, in terms of lighting, make the light-skinned folks, the wannabes, look as beautiful as the jigaboos, which was technically hard in 1988. In which a lot of that was like, that's unheard of. For everybody to look the same and everybody to look beautiful under varied lighting conditions, for the brown-skinned folks to be seen and separate from a dark background, to be able to be shot on black, like that is actually revolutionary. So despite sort of the dialogue, right, in the Jigaboo song, everybody looks beautiful. Which is a crazy contrast, but it's actually very intentional.
I think one thing that was a positive that stood out for me in this was the fact that I don't think I've seen a black film, especially during that time, that had the ability to be camp and whimsical. And there were so many moments through the musical moments where I had no clue that this was low-key a musical. And I love that he most definitely should have cut half them scenes. But I love the fact that he allowed this whimsical experience in this moment, in this film that was juggling so many of these topics that were either well done or not well done. But I do think we don't get the opportunity as black artists to really experience that level of camp. It feels like that word is specifically for white cis gay men, or pop culture that is focused on whiteness. And I love that I thought about oh, girl, this is kind of camp. I don't know if I like it, but it's camp.
And that's okay. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like it.
Musical scenes, it felt like the next ping on the Doppler radar for movies that have these big musical sets and dance sequences. Because when I was watching this, I was like, oh wow. The only other thing I can reference for this of the time would have been The Wiz. And that was 10 years before this? And so it was really fun seeing just people doing really well-techniqued dance and singing songs and really just joyfully expressing themselves through so many different forms of dance in one dance sequence. We don't really get a lot of that.
And Spike said he loved the MGM musicals from back in the day, and so this was his opportunity to pay homage to those big musicals of the 40s and 50s.
We got Phyllis Hyman on film.
Right. I mean, there's also the point about, somebody made the comment earlier of how so many legends are in this movie, and for many of them, this was their first movie.
Absolutely.
And somebody brought up A Different World earlier, and the same cast the story goes, I think it's Robbie Reed, who's still doing casting today. She casted School Daze, and because she did School Daze, when they were doing A Different World, they called her up. They was like, you probably know some blacks who would be good for this HBCU series. And that's how you see, Jasmine Guy, Kadeem Hardison, Ron, yes, as well. Tisha comes in eventually.
Oh yes, the Whoopi episode.
The Whoopi episode.
Yeah.
But speaking of calling her up, if we didn't get these movies, we wouldn't get Ruth E. Carter doing Black Panther in 2018. There's so many different ones.
But the other thing that's really great about this conversation is this was a movie that was of its time. And so we're in 2024 kind of dissecting a movie that was really actually of its time. And so so some things, you would know, huh?
You kind of hate that.
Right. So but it's cool for us to be able to think that the things are nostalgic and feel good, Be Alone Tonight, that will forever be an amazing movie moment for me. Because I remember as a little kid just sitting there, my little gay self, doing the dance move and singing the song.
Yeah.
And not really understanding that, some of the more misogynistic, homophobic things, because I was caught up in the magic of the movie and the music. And so, it's cool for us to think about, what in 2024 that we all, since we're all, creators, that we'll make, and then in 2058, some kids will be sitting around and being these problematic actors. Why would they even do that?
I'm ready for it.
I don't know about y'all.
To be on my
And there is a world where a different version of this film exists. this is only my second time watching this. And my first time watching this was actually my freshman year at an HBCU, 2007 at FAMU. We watched this at an event called Relay for Life, and that was my first time watching it. So watching this now, I didn't remember a lot of like the small story beats and plots. And so in the first act, watching Half Pint and what's the Afrocentric Pan-African brother name? Dab. Watching them in that library scene, I was like, oh, is this about to be a movie where he's pledging so that he can kind of infiltrate the fraternity and like expose what they do and like because we're in a culture of denouncing fraternities now. And so I thought we were going there because I had forgotten where the movie was gonna go. So yeah.
Spoiler, it didn't go anywhere.
It didn't go anywhere.
It didn't go anywhere.
One thing that I do want to say too, to Lyric's point, because that also about the dancers being lit the same way or to look beautifully. A lot of this movie was for me interesting because he didn't take sides about anything. All he did was bring up ideas like rape culture. I'm not going to talk about it more, but here's a scene that says this happens on campus. And homophobia in the Black community. I'm not going to like take sides, but here's a scene where that's shown. So and him casting himself in a part and not a hero role was a way I think of like absconding from like viewers being able to be like, what does Spike think about this?
And even that small scene at KFC where you see people who don't go to the HBCU being critical of college students.
Sam Jackson.
But I think that's the thing. We're all creatives. We're all either giving analysis about art. And I think the regular consumer is not viewing this film like this. I think that's why you have so many people who probably like love it and it's impact the culture and maybe they just don't have the language that we do to kind of like talk about these moments. But that's sometimes what I wonder with these films, like how is it landing to someone who lives in like South Carolina, like my mom or my grandmother, who is hearing this kind of homophobic language or seeing this kind of rape culture, or whatever it kind of means, how is it impacting consumers who aren't doing that extra leg of work to actually think about how it's impacting the culture as a whole? Well, because that's everybody. I think that's a lot of people.
I think people view it differently if it's watched today versus in 1988. I'd venture to say it didn't really ruffle any feathers when it came out in 1988.
For sure, I agree. I think that's my whole point, right? It didn't ruffle any feathers,
but not the way it would ruffle feathers today.
Right. Which is, I think that goes to my whole point.
I think I mentioned this earlier.
But that was the cultural norm.
He started filming on Morehouse's campus, and then they got wind of like what he was doing, and they kicked him out.
Too many jigaboos.
You know, and he had to go to Atlanta University at the time to finish filming,
and
right?
That's really interesting.
Right.
From like a censorship perspective
literally.
And like a cultural gatekeeping of like, oh, we don't want you to make art.
Literally, and at the time, right, there was like mixed feelings about this movie that was, some would say, reflecting some of the worst parts, right, of Black collegiate life, right? When at a time when we hoped and wished and thought that like you were going to school for you know a different type of experience.
And I think that's what makes this whole experience interesting is because we're looking at these things retrospectively. Like when The Color Purple came out, we know what those criticisms were like, but only because we're looking back at it like, oh, Black people didn't like how Black men were represented back then.
Speaking of Spike Lee.
Speaking of
coming for Alice Walker.
Well.
He was one of the main ones railing against The Color Purple.
He was. My house.
The nerve.
But he still talk about Bell Hooks' criticism of She's Gotta Have It.
Well, I'm unfamiliar with it, but I'm Team Bell.
No, it's great.
I was going to say
it's called Whose Pussy Is It? And that was, I interviewed him a couple of years before, I think Black Klansman. And he was just like, yeah, I just remember Bell was talking, I still remember, he told me the title and everything. I was like, because,
you have to kind of like really respect somebody who can receive all of that criticism and still press forward in their ideas. Because I will say, looking back at Spike Lee's career and his catalog, he, despite knowing that people are going to receive his work a certain way, he doesn't shy away from still putting out his very rigid ideas about just like society, which is interesting. I mean, as an artist, you kind of have to respect that game.
I think he adjusted. I think he wanted an Oscar, and he knew, and he adjusted.
Oh, he got that Oscar.
He adjusted.
You know, sometimes you play the game.
No. Well, this was nominated for best. This was nominated for Best Picture.
Was it?
It was.
He got it.
This was. It was it
This
not?
school.
Am I tripping?
Right.
That don't sound
I think you're tripping.
Look that up.
Right. That's the point.
But then Roger Ebert also rated it pretty well, so it's like maybe white people loved it.
I don't think in 1988 they
I
said
think the
Best
Academy.
Picture.
It did not. No, I'm looking
Do
it
the
up.
Right
right
Thing didn't.
Correct.
Right.
So
That was too much like right.
Exactly.
That was too much
I,
like
I
right.
would be very surprised.
Well. What a film.
So no, it was nominated for an NAACP Image Award.
That's interesting.
But that was, it was 88 when it was nominated.
Because we need
What
to go
about-
It's the
back
Oscar
to
of
our
the
own
people.
award.
It's the Oscar of the people.
How many black movies were out in 1988? I mean, I can appreciate how I feel like people would have just really enjoyed, especially the doing the butt scene. Like I feel like
Iconic.
It's iconic,
Yeah.
iconic.
People
So I
loved
feel
this
like-
movie.
I believe, yes.
Let's be clear, like, right? Like,
Well,
But just
people
to be
loved
in
this movie.
1988 and
Yeah.
to see this on the big screen for the first time, I feel like that would have been something really special.
To have Phyllis Hyman in a movie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I do
Right?
question how, even though Black Greek letter organizations are non-hazing organizations. All of them are non-hazing organizations. I do.
Cut it out.
They are. They are.
Where? Are you on the camera? Where?
There is factual proof to all this.
Which is where's my camera?
Now I feel bad.
What did Star Jones teach you? Allegedly.
What I'm saying is, no, they emphatically say, but by law, that they are non-hazing organizations. I'm curious to know how certain members felt about him portraying certain alleged rituals, pledging rituals on screen for everyone to see.
And it's Spike
We
Greek.
saw letters in this movie. We saw real letters.
It's Spike Greek.
No, I don't believe
That's
so.
me.
I do not believe
I
so.
don't believe
It's interesting because as a freshman, I was a part of our dorm step team, which they love to like follow traditional imagery of what Greeks
Yeah,
do.
the band, the
And
choir, everybody.
My dorm was
Everybody.
Gibbs, so it was Gibbs Hall, and our thing was we're G5G, and I didn't know what G5G was. So watching this back, I'm like, oh shit, we were doing like whatever their Greek thing was. Like we were G5G.
Oh, like a play on the
Yeah,
movie.
like literally doing the same type of
hilarious.
imagery and everything. So like this has influenced college campuses beyond like this movie itself because I don't imagine that was something that they were doing.
Yeah, I just know that people are certain people are very allegedly territorial about the alleged rituals in non-hazing organizations.
But
So
beyond
I'd be
rituals, they're like
curious
that
to
about
know
others.
the
You can
feed.
put AKA and Insecure without them
True.
raising noise.
But
That's why I was surprised
that's
to
because
see
she
them.
wasn't an AKA. I'm assuming that the alphas in this film were actual members of Alpha Phi Alpha. Amanda Seales ain't Alpha Kappa Alpha. So that would be my head scratcher. But I do love how it displays like
Now, hold on.
you hear about. I'll wrap my point up because you hear about white fraternities and sororities doing things like you got to run across campus naked at noon, and those are 2-year organizations, and this really highlighted for life and the branding aspect. So there were so many different aspects of Greek life in particular that were amplified, whether good, bad, or indifferent.
Well, I knew that I never wanted to be a part of it, but I was a safe space for those people who were on the line. And I remember
Define safe.
Okay, hold on.
Define.
Fraternity.
Yeah, the fraternity.
Define safe.
You
What's
know,
the safety in that?
It was an
Oh,
open
bosom
door
to cry.
policy if they needed protection and needed somewhere to just debrief.
Just the doors open.
And the door was open, but they had to let me know at a certain time. And so I knew I just didn't want to be a part of that. And I would always ask them, like, why are you letting them allegedly do those things to you just for these letters? What is that? What is it supposed to bring to you? And we would have those conversations, and then I would actually hear how they would call and talk to them and be like, get your and so I was like, allegedly.
Yeah.
Can we? But I was just like, in the bigger picture of it all, that person that I know I had that experience with still couldn't actually be themselves fully because they want to be a part of that organization, but that organization says you couldn't show up in your fullness. And so I was like, well, why would you still then want to be a part of that if you can't even be in your truth? And so that was the thing that I would always push back against, because, you know, I was never on a line, but I had many want to be on the line with me. I was the liaison to many of these. Organizational liaison.
All right, y'all.
School days.
Apparently. We're having that type of experience.
I would hate to leave this conversation and not know who here attended an HBCU and what HBCUs are represented in the house tonight.
Okay, great. That's wonderful to end on.
Yes. Come on.
Go ahead. You want to go ahead?
Well, you know, I'll start
Start.
with the #1 public HBCU in the nation. I'm a graduate of the Florida A&M University, home of the Rattlers FAMU.
And that's where Dr. Heavenly's daughter and Giselle Bryant's daughter are currently enrolled. Shout out to Bravo.
Other HBCUs?
Yes, I am from the real HU, Hampton University.
All right.
Next, anyone else would like to shout out an institution?
Morehouse College.
Take 2.
No, I think we should sit with that trauma. I think we should sit in that trauma.
Help to understand.
That's
Brooke from the real HU. I'm from the real LU. Sorry, Lincoln. Langston University. I always say, you know, second season BET's College Hill. It was never converted digitally. Someone in DC from The Office has our season in their basement physically. The first 2 seasons of BET's College Hill are gone. They cleaned out the office and they didn't convert everything to the jump drive or whatever.
All right. Any other HBCUs?
It's a fun fact.
Any other HBCUs?
No.
None.
HBCU, Dillard University out of New Orleans, Louisiana. D-U-D-T-T-T-T-T-U.
Do your thing.
Thank you so much. I also attended Morehouse College. Shout out to them. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Not everybody gets. Are we doing anything for the after show?
No, we done. No, who? No, you can help me after and clean up.
Okay. Oh, Tre'vell, are you going to do a proper close?
That was my proper close.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.